The Galactic Empire was the most powerful force in the universe. It controlled thousands of planets, ruled over countless species, and had technology far beyond imagination. No one dared to challenge them. Every species that tried had been crushed within days. One day, something unusual happened. A small spaceship appeared on the Empire's radar. It was slow, outdated, and poorly armed. The ship looked like a joke compared to the Empire's massive warships. The Imperial Command Center, located on the capital planet, received the report. High Commander Vorkus, a tall, reptilian alien with red eyes, frowned as he looked at the screen. "What species is this?" he asked. His assistant, a thin, insect-like creature named Krill, checked the records. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "They call themselves humans. They come from a small planet called Earth." Vorkus laughed. He had never heard of humans before. If they had never made contact with the Empire, they were probably weak and unimportant. "Are they requesting surrender?" he asked with a smirk. Krill shook his head. "No, Commander. They are requesting a meeting with the High Council." The room fell silent for a moment. Then, the officers burst into laughter. "A meeting?" One of the generals scoffed. What could these tiny creatures possibly want? Vorkus chuckled. "Fine. Let them come. This should be entertaining." The human ship was escorted to the Empire's capital planet, Zytharian Prime. It was a massive world covered in shining skyscrapers, enormous war factories, and glowing energy shields. The human small ship looked like a toy next to the Empire's massive dreadnoughts. As the human ship landed on the platform, hundreds of alien spectators gathered. They were curious. They wanted to see these primitive creatures for themselves. The air was filled with whispers and laughter. A door opened, and 3 humans stepped out. They wore simple uniforms, not shining armor, not glowing battle suits, just ordinary fabric. No visible weapons, no robotic enhancements. Nothing special at all. The aliens burst into laughter again. "These creatures are nothing," someone in the crowd shouted. Vorkus stepped forward, grinning. "Welcome, humans. The High Council has agreed to see you. Try not to embarrass yourselves." One of the humans, a tall man with dark hair, smiled slightly. He glanced at his 2 companions, and then back at Vorkus. "We'll do our best," he said, his voice calm. The crowd laughed even harder. Inside the Imperial Palace, the High Council sat on golden thrones. They were the rulers of the Empire, powerful beings with centuries of experience. The Emperor himself, a towering alien with 6 glowing eyes, leaned forward. "You are the humans?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. "Yes," the human leader replied. The Emperor smirked. "Why are you here? Do you wish to surrender your planet to the Empire?" The aliens in the room chuckled. The idea of these weak creatures resisting the Empire was ridiculous. But the human leader shook his head. "No," he said simply. Silence. The Emperor raised an eyebrow. "Then why have you come?" The human smiled. "We came to learn and to teach." Laughter filled the hall. One of the council members wiped a tear from his eye. "Teach us. Oh, this is priceless." The Emperor leaned back, amused. "And what, exactly, can you teach the greatest empire in the galaxy?" The human smile didn't fade. "You'll see." For the first time, there was a strange feeling in the air. It wasn't fear. It wasn't power. It was something the Empire had never felt before. Doubt. Vorkus could not stop laughing as the humans left the chamber. He had seen countless weak species try to impress the Empire before, and every single one of them had failed. These humans were no different. Their small size, primitive technology, and complete lack of enhancements made them seem even weaker than the Empire's lowest-ranked soldiers. The Emperor, still smirking, turned to his council. "If they want to prove themselves, let's give them a real test. Something entertaining." A cruel smile spread across Vorkus's face. "The pit of Torgeth," he said. A murmur ran through the chamber. The pit of Torgath was a massive combat arena, one of the most feared places in the galaxy. No outsider had ever survived. It was where criminals, traitors, and dishonored warriors were sent to die. The crowd would love it, and the humans would be nothing more than a short-lived spectacle. The Emperor chuckled. Perfect. Let's see if these humans are as brave as they pretend to be. The next day, the humans were summoned to the great amphitheater of Torgath. The arena was enormous, its walls towering high into the sky, lined with thousands of roaring spectators. Giant banners fluttered in the air, displaying the sigil of the Empire, a blood-red claw gripping a broken planet. Vorkis greeted the humans at the entrance. He was still smiling. "I hope you're ready," he said. "This is where the greatest warriors in the galaxy come to die." The human leader, the same tall man who had spoken in the council chamber, simply nodded. "We're ready." Vorkis sneered. "We'll see about that." The humans were led to the center of the arena. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and burning metal. Around them, massive gates lined the arena walls, each one leading to a different nightmare. Alien gladiators, genetically modified beasts, war machines programmed for destruction. A loud horn sounded. The crowd fell silent. From his throne above the arena, the Emperor stood and raised his hands. "Today, we witnessed the trial of the humans." His voice boomed across the amphitheater. "They claim to be strong. They claim to be worthy. Let's see if they can prove it." The gates groaned open. From the first gate emerged a Krovan brute, a towering four-armed reptilian warrior with skin like stone and muscles thicker than tree trunks. Its teeth were razor-sharp, and each of its four hands gripped a different weapon. From the second gate came a Gorgle hunter, a deadly predator with 6 legs, needle-like fangs, and camouflage skin that made it almost invisible. It hissed, its tongue flickering out as it locked onto the humans. From the third gate rolled out a Mechron war machine, a towering battle droid equipped with plasma cannons, razor-sharp claws, and an AI programmed to analyze and counter any opponent. The crowd cheered wildly. The odds were impossible. 3 humans against some of the deadliest beings in the Empire. The fight would be over in minutes. Vorkis leaned back in his seat, already picturing the human screams. "Let's begin." The horn sounded again. The battle had begun. The Krovan brute charged first, its massive feet shaking the ground. It swung its war hammer straight at the human leader. The crowd gasped. No one had ever survived a direct hit from a Krovan, but the hammer didn't connect. At the last second, the human moved, faster than anyone expected. He dodged under the attack, spinning to the side with perfect precision. The other 2 humans moved at the same time, their movements in sync like they had trained for this moment their entire lives. The second human, a woman with short blonde hair, drew a small blade from her belt. Compared to the Krovan's weapons, it looked pathetic. Then, in a single fluid motion, she slashed across the Krovan's knee joint. The massive brute roared in pain as dark green blood sprayed onto the sand. It staggered, unable to put weight on its leg. The third human, a shorter, muscular man, didn't hesitate. He leaped onto the Krovan's back, grabbing onto its thick skin with his bare hands. He twisted sharply, and with a sickening crunch, the Krovan's head snapped to the side. The massive warrior collapsed. The arena fell silent. No one had ever taken down a Krovan so quickly. Vorkis's smile faded. "What?" The crowd murmured, confused. This wasn't supposed to happen. But the battle wasn't over. The Gorgle hunter hissed and vanished, blending perfectly with the surroundings. It was invisible, moving silently as it circled the humans, preparing for the kill. The humans, however, did something unexpected. They closed their eyes. The crowd watched in confusion. Were they giving up? Accepting their fate? Then the human leader moved. His arms shot out, grabbing at the air, except it wasn't empty air. A scream rang out as the Gorgle hunter reappeared, its neck caught in the human's grip. The man's fingers tightened, crushing its windpipe in an instant. The creature flailed, gasping for air, but within seconds, it collapsed, dead. More silence. Vorkis shot up from his seat, his claws gripping the railing. That's impossible. The Emperor narrowed his glowing eyes. He was no longer amused. They knew where it was, even when they couldn't see it. Vorkis's mind raced. How? The Gorgle was a perfect predator. It had evolved to be undetectable. But the humans had sensed it. They had reacted before it attacked. The final opponent, the Mechron war machine, scanned the humans with its glowing red sensors. Its AI instantly analyzed the fight. It adjusted its tactics. It would not be caught off guard. Its arms spun, plasma cannons charging. Targets IDNTIFIED, it boomed. The humans didn't run. They didn't panic. Instead, they smiled. The next few moments changed everything. Before the Mechron could fire, the human leader pointed at it. The second human dashed forward at an impossible speed, weaving through the sand like a blur. The Mechron adjusted its aim, but she was too fast. In one fluid motion, she leaped onto the machine's back and plunged her blade into a small gap in its armor. Sparks erupted as the Mechron froze, its systems scrambling to compensate. The third human moved next, sprinting toward the paralyzed machine. He grabbed one of its arms and, with a roar, ripped it clean off. The machine twitched, sparks flying from its exposed circuits. The leader stepped forward. "Shut down," he commanded. The Mechron hesitated. Its eye was sophisticated, advanced beyond human technology. But it was still a program. And humans knew how to break programs. For the first time, an imperial war machine obeyed a human order. The battle was over. The crowd was completely silent. No one had ever defeated the pit of Torgith. And yet, the humans stood without a single scratch. Vorkis felt something he had never felt before. Fear. The silence in the amphitheater stretched on. Thousands of Imperial citizens sat frozen in their seats, their eyes locked onto the three humans standing victorious in the blood-stained sand. Never in the Empire's history had outsiders survived the pit of Torgath, let alone emerged completely unharmed. The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed as he studied the humans. He had laughed at them when they arrived. Now, there was no trace of amusement in his expression. Vorkis felt his claws tremble as he gripped the railing. He had expected entertainment. Instead, he had just witnessed something impossible. These creatures were dangerous. The Emperor finally spoke, his voice cold and measured. "How?" The human leader, tall, calm, and still breathing as if he had barely exerted himself, glanced up at the Imperial throne. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "We adapt," he said simply. The Emperor's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. The watching nobles whispered among themselves. The Imperial military officers in attendance exchanged uneasy glances. This was not how it was supposed to go. The humans were taken back to their chambers, but this time, no guards mocked them. No one dared to call them weak. Fear had taken root in the Empire's heart. Far above the planet, in the heart of the Imperial fleet, alarms blared. The supreme tactician of the Empire, High Strategist Orvos, stood in his command chamber, watching the replay of the arena battle. His sharp, insectoid features remained unreadable as the footage looped, again and again. The humans should have died. Their physiology was unimpressive. Their technology was primitive. And yet, they had defeated the Empire's finest biological and mechanical warriors with almost casual ease. Orvos turned to his assistant, a young officer standing rigid beside him. "What do we know about them?" The officer hesitated. "Very little, Supreme Tactician. They are from a backwater system, uncharted until now. Their homeworld is—" He paused, his mandibles clicking. "Hostile." Orvos glanced at him. "Hostile." The officer swallowed. "Yes, Supreme Tactician. Their world is unusual, extreme weather, apex predators. Their largest landmasses experience seasonal disasters. Their oceans are filled with megafauna capable of crushing battleships. Their civilizations have spent millennia at war with each other. Orvos stared at the data scrolling across his screen. He zoomed in on an image, a vast desert filled with venomous creatures, followed by an ocean where storms rage without end, then towering mountains lined with sheer cliffs and deadly drops. The humans had evolved on a death world. A slow chill crept up Orvos's spine. The Empire had encountered violent species before. Conquering them had been simple, but this was different. The humans weren't just violent. They were survivors. Orvos leaned back in his chair, thinking. These creatures were a threat that could not be ignored. Back on the surface, the humans sat in their quarters, speaking quietly among themselves. "I don't think they'll let us leave," said the woman, her arms crossed. "We scared them." The shorter man smirked. "Good." Their leader nodded. "We need to be careful. They're watching us." He was right. Imperial surveillance systems were tracking their every move. Every word they spoke was being analyzed. Every movement they made was being dissected. The Emperor had not yet decided their fate. But the humans knew one thing. The real test was only beginning. The Imperial Palace was silent, but tension crackled in the air like an unspoken threat. Deep within its stone corridors, Emperor Xalzir sat in his private chamber, staring at a holographic projection of the three humans. Their effortless victory in the arena had shaken the very foundation of the Galactic Empire. Across from him, Supreme Tactician Orvos stood rigid, his mandibles clicking with unease. The weight of what they had just discovered pressed down on him like a vice. "These creatures," Orvos began, his voice controlled but firm, "are not like anything we have encountered before." The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed. "Explain." Orvos gestured toward the hologram. "We have studied their biology. Their muscles are dense, capable of bursts of extreme strength. Their bones are resilient, even regenerating over time if broken. Their brains function with a level of adaptability that is," he hesitated, searching for the right word, "unsettling." The Emperor leaned forward. "Are they a threat?" Orvos did not answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up footage of the humans' homeworld, Earth. Images flickered across the screen. Towering cities built in the shadows of volcanic eruptions, spacecraft piercing the heavens despite relentless storms, deep sea divers exploring oceans filled with creatures the Empire would classify as apex-level threats. Wars, famine, disasters, all obstacles that should have crushed a species in its infancy. And yet, the humans had not only survived, they had thrived. Orvos exhaled slowly. "Your Majesty, these beings have evolved in an environment that should have killed them thousands of times over. Every species we have conquered has relied on either strength or intelligence. Humans use both, and they refuse to break." The Emperor's expression was unreadable, but his claws tapped lightly against the armrest of his throne. "Then we must break them before they become a problem." In the human quarters, the mood was tense but controlled. The leader, James Carter, sat against the cold stone wall, deep in thought. His two teammates, Sarah and Miguel, were watching the heavy steel door across the room, half expecting Imperial guards to storm in at any moment. "They're scared," Sarah muttered. Miguel scoffed. "Good. Let them be scared." James didn't look up. Fear makes people dangerous. Silence settled over them. The Empire had underestimated them. Once. That wouldn't happen again. A faint hissing noise interrupted their thoughts. The steel door slid open, revealing a tall, robed figure with a deep purple crest marking their status, a royal emissary. Behind him, two guards with energy weapons stood motionless, their gazes sharp. The emissary spoke in a smooth, practiced tone. "The Emperor has summoned you." Miguel smirked. "Oh, now we're getting invited to fancy meetings." Sarah elbowed him, but James stood without hesitation. "Lead the way." The throne room was vast, a monument to imperial power. Thousands of nobles and military officials stood in attendance, their eyes burning with suspicion and barely contained contempt. James, Sarah, and Miguel walked with controlled steps toward the emperor, who sat upon his towering obsidian throne. The supreme tactician stood beside him, arms clasped behind his back, his calculating gaze never leaving the humans. The emperor studied them for a long moment before speaking. "Your presence in my empire has become a matter of great interest." James tilted his head. "I'd imagine so." A ripple of irritation spread through the nobles at his casual tone, but the emperor remained still. "I am offering you a choice. You may pledge allegiance to the empire, serve as honored warriors under my rule." His golden eyes glinted. "Or be executed as a potential threat." Miguel chuckled under his breath. Sarah shot him a warning glance. James crossed his arms. "And if we refuse?" The emperor smiled, slow and deliberate. "Then you will suffer a fate worse than death." A deep silence settled over the chamber. The tension was suffocating. Then James did something no one in the empire expected. He laughed. It was not the laugh of a man cowering before a throne. It was not the forced chuckle of a prisoner trying to delay the inevitable. No, this was the laugh of someone who saw no reason to be afraid. The nobles looked at each other, confused. The guards stiffened. Even the supreme tactician's mandibles twitched in surprise. James shook his head, a grin still on his face. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, do you?" The emperor's expression darkened. "Enlighten me." James took a slow step forward. "You think strength is about power, about ruling over others. You think warriors are made by training and discipline. But where we come from, strength is something else." He turned slightly, glancing at Sarah and Miguel, before looking back at the emperor. "Strength is what keeps you standing after the world tries to break you. Strength is refusing to kneel, even when it's the easier option. Strength is knowing that no matter what you throw at us, we'll keep getting back up." The emperor's claws tightened against the armrests of his throne. His golden eyes flickered with something dangerous. The supreme tactician, however, remained still, watching, calculating. James met the emperor's gaze without fear. "You want to test us? Go ahead. But just remember one thing." His voice was steady, unwavering. "You won't be the first empire that thought it could break us." The silence in the throne room was deafening. Thousands of nobles and high-ranking officials stared at the three humans, their expressions a mix of disbelief and barely restrained outrage. The mere idea that these creatures, these primitive beings, would dare to defy the emperor of the Galactic Empire was beyond comprehension. Yet, there they stood, unbroken, unafraid. The emperor's claws drummed against the armrest of his throne, a slow, rhythmic sound that sent shivers through the gathered elites. Beside him, supreme tactician Orvos remained motionless, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the humans. Finally, the emperor spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a razor-sharp edge beneath the surface. "You are either the bravest creatures I have ever encountered, or the most foolish." James Carter smirked. "Why not both?" A ripple of gasps spread through the nobles. One of them, a high-ranking military commander, stepped forward angrily. His thick, armored exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's golden light. "Enough of this nonsense. These creatures should be crushed for their insolence," he bellowed. "They are an infestation, nothing more." The emperor raised a hand, and the commander fell silent, though his eyes burned with fury. The supreme tactician finally spoke, his voice smooth and calculated. "Perhaps, Your Majesty, we should test them further." James folded his arms. "Haven't we done enough tests?" Orvos's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. "You misunderstand. We are no longer testing your physical abilities. We have seen what your bodies can do. Now," his multifaceted eyes gleamed, "we test your minds." James glanced at Sarah and Miguel, then back at the tactician. "And what does that mean exactly?" The emperor leaned forward, A slow, deliberate motion. A game. Sarah frowned. A game. Yes, Orva said. A battle of wits. Strategy. Survival. Miguel raised an eyebrow. You mean like chess? The nobles murmured among themselves, unfamiliar with the word. Orvos tilted his head. It is an ancient imperial tradition. A contest that determines the true rulers of the battlefield, not through brute force, but through intelligence, foresight, and cunning. James's smirk widened. Sounds fun. And what happens if we win? The Emperor's gaze darkened. You will not. The Imperial Colosseum was unlike anything the humans had seen before. It was not an arena of blood and combat, but of war and deception. Massive holographic maps hovered in the air, shifting landscapes, armies moving like pieces on a board. A battle simulator, but on a scale meant for galactic warlords. Sarah whistled. All right. I'll admit, this is impressive. Miguel crossed his arms. What's the goal? A robotic voice echoed through the Colosseum. Victory is simple. Conquer. Survive. Command the battlefield. The last one standing wins. James stepped forward, analyzing the glowing battlefield before them. So, this is a strategy war game. Orvos, standing beside the Emperor, nodded. Indeed. Every great conqueror in our empire has proven their worth here. Only the greatest minds succeed. James smirked. Well, we humans do love strategy games. The Emperor's claws tightened. Let the trial begin. As soon as the simulation started, the battlefield changed. Massive armies clashed. Imperial fleets, ground forces, mechanical war beasts. The humans were given their own forces, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Miguel let out a low whistle. They're really not making this easy for us. Sarah cracked her knuckles. Good. I'd be insulted if they did. James, however, was already analyzing the battlefield, his mind working at lightning speed. All right, he said. We don't fight them head-on. They've got the numbers. But numbers mean nothing if you control the battlefield. Sarah grinned. Flanking maneuvers? James nodded. Exactly. We play dirty. The battle began. While the Imperial commanders used brute force, the humans used speed and unpredictability. Instead of engaging in direct combat, they used deception, drawing enemy forces into traps, ambushes, and strategic misdirection. Miguel hacked into the simulation, altering terrain and weather patterns to create chaos among enemy ranks. Sarah orchestrated psychological warfare, sending out false signals, making the Empire believe reinforcements were arriving when none were. James? He watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then he found it. Within minutes, the battlefield was in flames. Entire Imperial divisions had collapsed, their forces divided and confused. James activated the final strike, a coordinated assault that hit every weak point in the enemy's formation. The simulation flickered. The Imperial armies crumbled. And then, victory. The Colosseum fell silent. The nobles, the generals, even the Emperor himself stared in stunned disbelief. The humans had won. James turned to the throne, his smirk never fading. Checkmate. The silence in the Colosseum was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. The nobles, the generals, the Emperor himself, all frozen in disbelief. The humans had won. James Carter took a slow, deliberate step forward. His smirk never wavered as he looked up at the throne where the Emperor sat, still as stone. Checkmate, James repeated. A ripple of whispers spread through the hall, like a wave of shock crashing over the gathered elites. This was impossible. No outsider had ever defeated the Imperial strategy trial. It was a test designed to showcase the superiority of the Empire's greatest minds. A game meant to humiliate lesser species, and yet these humans had outmaneuvered them all. Orvos, the supreme tactician, stepped forward, his insectoid eyes blinking rapidly. For the first time, his voice held something resembling uncertainty. You manipulated the battlefield to your advantage. Sarah crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. That's called strategy. Miguel grinned. Didn't think we had it in us, did you? The Emperor's claws tightened around his throne. His golden eyes burned with something unreadable. Not just anger, but something deeper. James recognized that look. Fear. The Emperor of the Galactic Empire, ruler of countless worlds, was afraid. And that's when James knew they had changed the game. Orvos turned toward the Emperor, speaking in their native tongue. The translation device crackled, struggling to keep up. Cannot be ignored, Your Majesty. Their tactics. They should not have won, yet they did. The Emperor said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood. The entire room tensed. You have proven yourselves, the Emperor said, his voice colder than before. You have displayed intelligence, resourcefulness, defiance. James tilted his head. That last one sounds like a problem for you. A flicker of amusement passed through the Emperor's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something sharper. Your victory changes nothing, he said. You are still inferior. Sarah scoffed. Right, because inferior species win wars against superior ones all the time. The Emperor ignored her, turning his gaze back to James. Your actions have made you a curiosity. But curiosities are dangerous. You have upset the order of things. Miguel exhaled sharply. Here we go. The Emperor stepped forward, his golden robes flowing behind him. A challenge to the Empire's strength cannot go unanswered. And so we will settle this once and for all. James narrowed his eyes. What are you suggesting? Orvos stepped in, his mandibles twitching. The Imperial combat trials. A new murmur spread through the nobles. This time, it wasn't just shock. There was excitement, anticipation. Miguel frowned. Why do I get the feeling this won't be like your little strategy game? Orvos's multifaceted eyes gleamed. Because this time, it is not a game. The Imperial combat arena was a monument to war. Unlike the Colosseum, which tested minds, this was a place of blood and battle. The arena itself was a massive, ever-shifting battlefield, filled with unpredictable terrain, mechanical hazards, and ever-changing gravity zones designed to test the limits of any warrior. And in the center of the battlefield, waiting for the humans, the Empire's greatest champions. Sarah tightened the straps on her combat gear. All right, so what exactly are we up against? Miguel tapped at his wrist device, scanning the arena. His expression darkened. Not great news. We've got war beasts, bio-enhanced gladiators, and something called the Devourer. James sighed. Of course, there's a Devourer. A deep voice boomed across the arena. Let the trials begin. The gates opened, and hell was unleashed. A mechanical monstrosity charged forward, its claws glowing with plasma energy. Behind it, a towering reptilian warrior roared, its forearms gripping serrated blades. James ducked just as a bolt of energy sizzled past his head. Yeah, okay. This is definitely not a game. Miguel spun, dodging a hulking brute swinging a war hammer the size of a car. We need a plan. Sarah was already moving. Same plan as before. Don't die. The first wave hit them like a tidal force. James rolled under an attack, coming up with his pulse rifle, squeezing the trigger. A shot slammed into the reptilian warrior's armor, barely slowing it down. Sarah used her grappling hook to launch herself into the air, flipping over a war beast and landing a shot to its exposed neck. It let out a screech before collapsing. Miguel activated a drone, sending it weaving through the battlefield, hacking into the arena's environment controls. Just a few more seconds, he shouted. James gritted his teeth, dodging another strike. We don't have a few more seconds. Miguel's device beeped. Got it. The arena shifted. Gravity inverted in certain zones, sending warriors flying. Barriers flickered in and out, creating openings. The war beasts faltered. James saw the opening and took it. He grabbed a fallen energy blade, spun, and drove it through the heart of the reptilian warrior. It let out a final growl before collapsing. Sarah vaulted over a downed opponent, landing beside him. That's one. James glanced around at the remaining fighters. A lot more to go. Miguel smirked. Let's see how superior they really are. The battle had just begun. The battlefield was silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence before a storm. The Galactic Empire had thrown everything at them. War beasts, cybernetic champions, genetically engineered warriors, each deadlier than the last. And yet, the humans were still standing. James wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing at Sarah and Miguel. Their armor was dented, their weapons nearly depleted, but their eyes were still sharp. The Imperial spectators were no longer laughing. The mockery, the smug superiority, it was all gone. Now, there was only fear. But the humans weren't in the clear yet. The Emperor stood from his throne, his golden eyes burning with something unreadable. Beside him, Orvos, the supreme tactician, was whispering rapidly in their native language. James couldn't hear the words, but he could read the tension in their body language. The Empire had underestimated them once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. The Emperor raised a clawed hand. You have proven yourselves as warriors. You have defied the odds. You have impressed the court. A murmur rippled through the nobles. James narrowed his eyes. That tone, it wasn't defeat. It was calculation. The Emperor's gaze locked onto him. And for that, you shall be rewarded. Sarah snorted. Yeah, I'm sure this reward is gonna be great. Miguel tapped at his wrist device, scanning for hidden dangers. Stay sharp. I don't trust this guy. The Emperor stepped forward. The Galactic Empire values strength. We do not ignore it. And so, I offer you this. The massive doors at the end of the Colosseum rumbled open. James turned, expecting another wave of warriors, another impossible challenge. Instead, an army marched in. Row after row of armored soldiers, their weapons gleaming under the arena lights. Thousands of them, each one standing at attention with a level of discipline that spoke of elite training. Miguel's breath caught. Oh, that's not good. Sarah clenched her fists. He's sending an entire army against 3 of us. James didn't reply. His mind was racing. No, this wasn't an execution. This was something else. The Emperor smirked. You have proven yourselves as warriors. Now, prove yourselves as leaders. The realization hit James like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just another test. This was war. And the humans were expected to command an army. Sarah's eyes widened. Wait a second. You're giving us troops. The Emperor spread his arms. If you wish to be seen as equals, you must fight as equals. Lead my warriors. Conquer a world. Show me if humanity is truly worthy of standing among us. James exchanged a glance with Miguel and Sarah. This was bigger than they had expected. Far bigger. A battle of survival had turned into a battle of conquest, and the entire galaxy was watching.